the trailer for Rock Camp says 25 years in the making. Of course, it didn't take 25 years in the documentary. But do you remember when you filmed your parts of Rock Camp?
Oh my God. Myself and Teddy Zigzag Andreatis, we're like the longest standing counselors at the camp. And I would say probably for Teddy, it's been maybe 15 years or more. And for myself, it's like, 12, 13 years. So this is a concept that I believe about maybe 10 years ago, we started rolling with film, with cameras at the camp. And it's evolved, the focus, and we have been watching different edits and different versions of it. And from the very, very first version of the documentary, my feelings are that the star of the show not only is it the concept of Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, but it's really David Fishoff.
Yes,
it's really his story. I mean, he is who drives this camp, and so what an amazing arc to his journey. As starting from a sports agent,
right,
somebody who loves music, to having these happy accidents happen in his life, so it says renting an office next to a music agent.
Yes.
And that's how he started getting into being representing artists, musicians. As a matter of fact, at one point, he was representing the Guess Who, which is the band that I play in right now.
Yes.
So, there's all these 6 degrees, outside of the camp. And and then evolving into, somehow getting the rights to the Monkees name, then putting the Monkees on tour at the same time as MTV was, unbeknownst to him, was going to start rebroadcasting the Monkees TV series.
Yes.
I mean, it was perfect timing, then becoming Ringo's manager and putting the Ringo All-Stars. Then Rock and Roll Fantasy, the first Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp was actually Ringo's All-Stars band. I would have signed up for that myself, So it's like a sequence of like, wow, all these things just falls into place because he's doing the right thing and he's doing it the right way. I believe that there's an order to the universe. That's the way God created. There's an order of things. And once you operate under that order of doing all the right steps, things happen because they're in harmony with everything else around you. So that's my take on the documentary. So to me, the more David Fishoff in the documentary, the more I think it really captures the essence and the spirit of what the film is about.
I've had the pleasure of interviewing David before, and I'm going to be interviewing him again today. So I'll send him your best later today.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
I'll say Rudy gives the best possible explanation of who David Fishoff is. So if you don't mind, can I ask about your career now?
Of course. Okay.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
So when I go through your timeline and thinking about, having read your book, which is an excellent memoir, because it seems like you're one of the few people who was sober enough through the 70s and 80s to actually remember all this stuff. And I go through your timeline. We say, he had his time with Quiet Riot and with Ozzy and with Whitesnake, later years, Blue Oyster Cult, Guess Who. Are there
Dio? Yeah, Dio.
Oh, Dio, early 2000s Dio as well. You always were working, but one thing I wasn't sure about was, were there things that we don't know about from your career? Like, were there a lot of almost happens?
You mean like as far as like a scenario, let's say,
were there a lot of, oh, well, I was in this band and this band was signed, but we don't really talk about it, or for this band and that was supposed to happen but didn't?
Yeah. I mean, I truly believe that I've worked harder at my failures than my successes, because when it happens, it's just like, again, you're a part of something that all the moving parts are functioning like they should. You know, it's like a clock. You know, when one of those little, you know, wheels goes wrong, the whole thing just, you know, falls apart.
Yeah.
But at least I'm talking traditional, you know, moving clocks, you know, not what we have nowadays, you know,
Yeah.
with the digital stuff. Okay. And, and yeah, it's happened to me. You know, I put bands together. As a matter of fact, the last band that I was signed to, that I put together and from scratch. This is in 1990. David Coverdale had announced to the band that the Slip of the Tongue tour was going to be the last tour for a while for Whitesnake. So we all started thinking about, you know, ahead while we were on tour, what we were going to, you know, do next. So one of the things that I did was I put together a band that consisted of two very successful musicians today. One of them was John Five, before he had a number. It was John Lowry, and Richard Danielson from Vintage Trouble, the drummer. So you know, they were in the, you know, Johnny was in his teens. Wasn't even old enough to drink, but he's never drank anyway, so
Yeah.
that didn't matter. And Richard was very, very young, so you know, and we got signed to a label, and we were getting ready to, like, you know, make a record, and then grunge happened, and it was like, wow, you know, our direction at the time was basically what I had been doing in the 80s, you know. Not as much Ozzy direction, but more like Quiet Riot and Whitesnake.
Mm-hmm. So big
and
yeah.
And actually, if I would have just thought about, wait a minute, what are these guys grunge? Well, grunge kind of sounds like Black Sabbath early days. Wow, I'll just go back to that. I was doing that with Ozzy, but no, my head was stuck up the the 80s hair metal, but you know. So I just didn't know what to do, and that whole thing fell apart. And then I got back together with the reunited Quiet Riot a few years later, you know.
And Manic Eden was around the same time as that band with John Lowry.
Well, yes. Manic Eden did happen, and we were, you know, we had a record deal, and it got released. We did some touring, and then again, it was not the type of band that was going to get any airplay or MTV, you know, spots, you know, on their scheduling, because it was still, there was too much 80s and too much Whitesnake. It was Tommy Aldridge, Adrian Vandenberg, and myself, and Ron Young from Little Caesar. That was like the only hip factor to the band. You know, one guy, we were one member. And Ron was an incredible singer, incredible presence, you know, great frontman. But it, you know, it had too much Whitesnake in it, and even though it did not sound like Whitesnake, because Ron was not the original singer when we went in the studio and cut the tracks. We had a different singer, but that singer was way too much 80s, too much Whitesnake. So it just wasn't working out for the big picture that everybody had in mind. So we brought in Ron, and he rewrote the melodies and the lyrics. He did an incredible job, and that's why you have Manic Eden. I think certain things would have been played musically a little bit different if Ron was in the project from the very beginning, because but then again, it's an interesting mix that you have of the more 90s vocal stylings, and then more of the traditional blues. Actually, it was pretty bluesy, but then again, it had some of that that more of the Whitesnake 80s shimmer to it, you know. But it's an interesting record. I'm very proud to have been a part of that.
It's very interesting to me, hindsight being 2020, looking back at everything, that that period of your life, it's looking at things like, oh, that's too 80s. And then you look at Animetal, which had big success internationally. And the whole reason you got that is because it's too 80s. So I'm curious, when in your life you kind of realized that it was okay again to be associated with big artists of the 80s, keeping in mind that you've had success in the 90s, 2000s, etc.
Yeah. Animetal, I got to give all credit as far as the masterminding of it to the production team behind Animetal, because Animetal USA is really a Japanese centric project, a band project. It's not just a band; it's a concept, you know, and it's anime centric, which is a special style of music, and for Japan is very much into the spirit of what 80s music metal is all about. It's not, they really did not embrace grunge like they still do 80s type metal. There's a certain joy to it, and diatonic spirit to the music of the 80s that the Japanese audience really embraces, especially the anime audience. You know, it's a really good marriage, anime visually and 80s metal.
Sure. A lot of the people who, again, to use the 280s kind of term, you know, Danger and Taiketo, like all these people were still working throughout the 90s in Japan, which turned out to be something for everybody. So all that said, I look at Rudy Sarzo and I think of a guy who's had success again, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010. He's been part of countless classic bands. He's had record deals, whether or not you knew it, in the 90s, 2000s, 20s, and all that. Is there anything that you haven't gotten the chance to do that you still hope to as a musician?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a project right now, and the pieces are coming together really nicely. It's not been a struggle to get it off the ground yet. And at least this is from our end, putting it together. And it's a combination of, it's music centric, but it's animation. And we're using a technology that is pioneered by the creator of the whole project and their company. So we're not only are we introducing a certain theme and something that is very original conceptually, but also the technology behind it is going to take. It's going to be pretty much what Skype and Zoom have been able to allow people communicating around the world. This is what it will do for content, especially animation content. Yeah,
I've read that you yourself are an animator. When did you first get into that?
Well, this is how I met the Brent Young, who the company's called Super 78. And I met him because I started getting in that circle, in that animation universe. No, it's because, you know, I kind of like, you know, I see things coming. Like I saw this whole internet thing and download. And I mean, I saw that before the technology was fully fledged. Because if you see like, wow, if this gets developed, if this flower grows, it's going to be beautiful. So you have to look at it from that seed. Well, it's a seed. Then you put it in the ground and make it happen. Technology is pretty much like that. Technology is if it's something pops up like, wow, we have this capability, you know. And back in the day, it usually started with porn.
Like, yeah. Porn and wrestling have always been ahead of the curve in terms of technology.
That's right. So, you know, it's like it internet, or you know, originally started out with this really shady things about people like, well, why should we go to a theater and buy a video cassette if we can actually go on the internet and watch porn, you know? So, and I wouldn't even think anybody, as far as that I know myself, even think about internet and porn anymore. But that was kind of like the seed of it, you know. So did the VHS revolution, you know, people having home entertainment, being able to tape. Well, you can, you know, instead of going to a dark theater, you can actually buy this cassette and stick it in your home and do whatever you want, you know. So the I could see, and I would tell companies that I was working with, hey, listen, you know, this whole thing about being exclusive to a mom and pop store, you know, there's stores, because again, Guitar Center was not back in the early 90s what it is today. It's like, you know, it's taken over the the mom and pops, unless you're living in rural areas. And now you got Amazon, you got Sweetwater Music and Reverb. So that's a lot of musicians, including myself. I buy stuff from Sweetwater. I just have it shipped, you know. And so there's all these possibilities that they just was, you see the seed of technology, you see things happen. So my thought was, well, you know, because of YouTube and the companies just not having a budget for videos and bands, you know, not even unsigned bands trying to get noticed. And how do you do that? Well, in the old days, you used to you know, move to LA and showcase for the labels, right, in the hopes that an A&R guy or a flunky from the, you know, from the label will walk in and watch you play live and say, and the next day go back to his boss and say, hey, you got to check out these guys. Right. That's how it happened. You know, it doesn't happen like that anymore. That's on YouTube. So the only way to get really, you know, to represent this is what the band is about, you have to make your own videos. You have to, you know, I mean, of course, yeah. You know, I got into it, what, 15 years ago. That's when I got into 3D animation, because I knew that the modern musician, and I was talking about 15 years ago, thinking about what it would be like today, there will be guys in the band who are in, their job is to record the music, and there will be guys who their job is to create the videos. In some cases, it's just one guy that does that. In some cases, they split it. But I knew that visuals, graphics, and that's including special effects, you know, using After Effects, using whatever software you use. Adobe, I personally use Vegas, Sony Vegas, so to make videos. As far as 3D animation, I started out, actually I was trained in a brand that doesn't exist anymore. It's called Softimage, because Softimage was owned by Avid. Oh, okay. And Avid being a, you know, Pro Tools. You know, so you got Avid for cutting, you know, editing video. And yeah, they saw it like, you know, we're at Avid, it's de facto, you know, software to cut, edit video. And then Pro Tools came along with it, you know, and they were intertwined. They still are, you know, it's the same company, and they have Softimage. And then Softimage got bought out by Autodesk. Oh, okay. And they incorporated all of the three major 3 CG software, which is their flagship was 3ds Max, which is actually a branch. Originally, 3ds Max was a CAD software to model. It didn't have animation, and then, you know, as Autodesk, and then it became 3ds Max with as an animation, because basically you're just adding keyframes to whatever the model is, and you know, you do whatever bending, or you put a rig in there and, you know, animate it. And they also purchased Maya, and they purchased Softimage, and then they started dismantling the software, incorporating certain features from each one of them, and now they just have two major. They got rid of Softimage, and now it's Maya and 3ds Max. And but while Softimage was owned by Avid, I was actually trained in Softimage by the people who went out there training all the studios, you know, all the animators, because every time that there's a new feature in the software, there's guys that go out there and say, hey, this is how you do it, and cut out the time, you know, in having the learning curve of that feature, which is usually something pretty massive, such as lip syncing, you know, automating the lip sync, or crowd generators, you know, like there's a software called Massive. I haven't been in that world as far as creating content in a while, because the reason why I started getting into 3D animation was I had to start wearing glasses. Okay. You know, and playing the bass was not as much fun anymore wearing glasses, but not on stage. And then eventually I got LASIK, and then I got my vision back. And it's like, now I just apply all my time to music, to playing the bass and guitar. Yeah.
And guitar. And guess who is the current project, which I don't think Americans usually realize how big the Guess Who was in Canada. Like that's a kind of like a top 5 all-time Canadian band. So had you toured Canada as much before the Guess Who?
Yeah, we've done some shows in Canada. Oh, you mean before or as a member of the Guess Who?
Well, before you joined the Guess Who, you were in some very, very big bands.
Yeah.
But my impression is your Canadian tour, usually when you're in a huge band, is Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Winnipeg, and out. Whereas when you're in a big Canadian band, you're playing Brampton and every city possible.
Yeah, well, I did that with Ozzy. In 1981, we tour everywhere in Canada. You know, especially the border towns. You know, and because you know the band was in '81, we were just doing the bigger venues were theaters. So a minor league hockey team will always have like a smaller hockey arena, and we will play there. You know. And then later on, when the band got really big, then you know, for the '82 tour, and then we were just concentrating on the major markets, you know, like you mentioned, Toronto and Montreal. And I have to look at the schedule to go back to 1982 and look at it, because in 1981, that's when we did the Blizzard of Oz tour in Canada. Yeah. But then I went back with Quiet Riot, and I've always done a lot of touring in Canada, you know, and I just love it. I love it there. And as a matter of fact, I'm a member of a charity organization that's based out of Calgary. It's called Benevolent Artists National Charity, and we've raised millions of dollars, and we donated a lot of money to the National Music Center, which is based in Calgary, and some other organizations, charity organizations, and so I get to spend a lot of my Octobers, except for this past year, are spent in Calgary, basically, and then we go to Edmonton and some other cities too. Yeah.
So between touring and recording, animation, charitable endeavors, and also the podcast you were doing, Rudy doesn't stop working. So do you got time for one more topic and then you're a free man?
Yes.
This is one thing.
Yes. I love doing podcasts because on my radio show, it's all about the special guests, you know, celebrating their career. I just had Andrew Luke Oldham, who is the original manager and producer for the Rolling Stones, and he's got stories and he's got opinions, you know. But I think it's very important for the listener, and this is the format. The original, let's say Andrew will be on like in 2 or 3 weeks, right? It's their broadcast, traditional broadcast. It just happens to be on Monsters of Rock Radio, on Dash Network, and we get about an average of 500,000 per broadcast. So each episode is it's pretty good. Well, I mean, it's free. It's not like subscription, like Sirius or any of the other ones. It's free, you know, to become, you know, to download the app and, you know, and tune in. So, and it's some really, really great playlists on the whole network, you know. So what I really like about it is that it's my show, 6 Degrees of Sarzo, is a blend of interview, like we're doing, and music related to the topic, to the bands that we talk about, the artists, you know. So, you know, you get to hear certain stories, backstories about the music, and then you hear the music, and then maybe you have a whole different take on the music,
right?
You know, now that you have some backstories about it. But what I really, really, really love about the idea of broadcasting at the same time is that as a musician, I completely understand resonance with the frequencies that the music creates and the body resonance that we'll feel when we hear it. Like when you go to live music, you hear the band is resonating because they're creating this music, they're one. And then the audience feels these frequencies. So we're all tuned to the same frequency instantly, collectively, you know, and that is, I think that's one of the greatest emotions or that humanity can feel as a whole, as a tribe, you know. And because let's say if you're a fan of the Guess Who and you come to our show, you belong to that tribe. That's why people are so proud to wear merchandise saying, hey, I belong to this tribe. Right. But with music, you belong to many tribes, you know. It's like an international tribal experience, you know. And so that's what I love, that the fact that it's not a podcast that you can at any time download, listen to it, and then you're the only person resonating. If you have, like I mentioned, over 500,000 people in the world listening to our show at the same time, there's a vibration that exists that is in harmony. So at least we have these people in harmony living together in this planet.
I love it. I'm a podcast guy. And if you do have time for that one more topic.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I consider you a music historian because whether or not it was on purpose, you never stopped working and you knew everyone and know everyone, and you were around for a lot of people before they were famous, that kind of thing. So the original days of Choir Riot, which you were around for the Starwood and all that, you must have seen 100 Van Halen shows. One thing, I'm getting hesitation there.
No, go ahead. So
what I'm curious about is I've heard that before Van Halen was big, that David Lee Roth had a different kind of onstage persona where he was telling more stand-up comedy, one-liner kind of jokes. He's wearing overalls and all that. Is that something that you remember at all?
I arrived, I became a resident of Los Angeles officially in 1978. I visited and I scouted LA. And as a matter of fact, I lived for a little while in 77. And by then they were signed, you know, it was a whole, they were developed. I wasn't there for the early 80s part. I first arrived in 76, came back in 77, and I spent almost a year. And then I had to leave because I ran out of money. Yeah. And then I went and started doing some gigs, came back with money, and I've been in here since 1978 steadily. So I missed the whole thing. I only saw Choir Riot once at the Starwood because Van Halen was sold out of the whiskey and I couldn't get in. So, and yeah, this was in, I believe, 76, 77. And because it was on one of my trips, I think it was 76, yeah, whatever. And that was it. You know, I was spending more time at the Rainbow because it was free to get in.
And the pizza.
Yeah. I mean, if I could find somebody to give me a slice, you know. Because starving me, you know what's really, really curious? Okay, you went into the Rainbow in the late 70s, and at the booths, you would see, well, each band had a booth, like Rainbow, the band Rainbow had a booth, the small one, not the big one. The big ones were in the back, that was Led Zeppelin. Then in the middle, you had Deep Purple, you had The Who, and that was it. And there was reverence. You did not sat at that booth unless you were invited, and in my case, zero invitation. But I know some people who were invited, but not me, because you know it's like it's the band and chicks. They want to invite some starving musician, you know, to sit at the table. It's, you know, it gets cramped. But anyways, so when the MTV generation, which is what I call, some people call the hair bands, I call it the MTV generation of the Sunset Strip. When, you know, bands like Choir Riot and Motley Crue and so on, we started getting big, then everything changed. Those booths became our booths. But those same guys, including myself, we were the starving musicians walking around the aisles of the rainbow in the hopes that somebody would invite us to sit down and share with them a slice of pizza.
Rudy, can't thank you enough for your time. Looking forward to seeing all the new projects. I'm so glad that you just never stopped and you've stayed at top level for decades now. So keep it up. And you and Rock Camp, you're doing the good thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. God bless.
Paltrocast.